Do we sell ourselves short? Maybe. Does that inner voice inside you, reading a text like this, reading a passage like this, and you're like, well, that's Paul. I couldn't do those kind of things. Really? Sometimes there's that voice in our heads that is our own worst enemy and counteracts our conviction that God would say, do this, right? God's out there saying, I've paved the way. I've made it all possible for you to overcome. I'm standing there right there with you. Behold, I will never leave you or forsake you. And there's that voice inside that says, I don't know. Not sure. And that's one, our humanity. That is the human side of us. And it also is maybe the voice of somebody else, right? Who would have us not be convicted. Because if you can get people unconvicted, if you can get a whole group of people that are halfway doing a thing, and you get them unconvicted, and they no longer have the zeal that's there, that fire's gone, you don't have to change them that much, right? You don't have to do that much. You just turn that fire down. Just dial it back. They'll never reach the destination. And you've won, right? As somebody who would be counter to what we're trying to do. So conviction. Conviction. Where's my conviction? And again, this is something that we all, please do not think that, oh, hey, well, you know, I gotta do all these big things. No, the big things start with the first little thing. And we'll look at some of that right now. First, we need to believe we can. We need to believe it's possible. Right? That's the first thing. Do you wake up every morning, believe you can do the next thing? When you wake up, you already have something set in motion. You have a plan for your day, typically. Do you believe, hey, I'm going to step out of this bed, and I believe that my feet will touch the ground? I don't know if it'll hurt or not, but I believe they'll touch the ground, right? And so we need to make sure we believe we can. So we're looking at Philippians chapter 4. Paul's letter to the Philippian churches was very, very heartfelt. And looking in this passage, he says, "But I rejoice in the Lord greatly, that now at last you have revived your concern for me. Indeed, you were concerned before, but you lacked opportunity. Not that I speak from want, for I have learned to be content in whatever circumstances I am. I know how to get along with humble means. I also know how to live in prosperity. In any and every circumstance, I've learned the secret of being filled and going hungry, both of having abundance and suffering need. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Nevertheless, you have done well to share with me in my affliction." This concept of I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me is in the context of suffering on behalf of the gospel, is in the context of going through, no matter what the circumstances, preaching the gospel, continuing to preach the message, continuing to carry that message. I can do all things through Christ through him who strengthens me, no matter the circumstances that I find myself in. So I need to believe that I can do this and make sure I can carry this through. And very similarly, in Colossians chapter 1, verse 29, maybe just a page over for you, he writes, "For this purpose I also labor, striving according to his power, which mightily works within me." Believe we can is not this, well, I'm just going to pull myself up by my own, what? Bootstraps, which we don't even use anymore. Nobody uses bootstraps. But that concept that I'm self-sufficient, right? That I can do it. I have my own, within myself, I have all the power and conviction to make things happen. How much of what Paul did he can do because of the power of God? Everything. Everything is the right answer. Has that changed for us? No, it hasn't changed for us. And so we need to make sure that, yes, I can do these things with God. These things are possible. With God, I believe I can do this thing. And we step out on faith and doing those things. Does it help to have role models? Oh, yes, it helps. It's nice to go through the text and see other people who have done it before. When you think about a role model of one who has suffered up under various trials, do you think of Job? Possibly. In Job chapter 13, verse 15, he says, "Though he slay me, yet will I serve him." Now he goes on to say, "And when he kills me and I get up there, I'm going to have some words to say with him." But he says, even if he kills me, I'm going to serve him. And we know what happened with Job. It was not peaches and cream what Job went through. He is a name of suffering. Habakkuk, not a name we speak very often, or maybe know how to spell really quickly. But if you look over in Habakkuk chapter 3, I only say that because I'm not a great speller. Some of you are like, I know, I've seen your slides. Y'all can laugh. I laugh at myself too. Habakkuk chapter 3. Somebody like to read that for us, please? Habakkuk chapter 3, 17 and 18. Josh, we're still trying to find it. Okay. Habakkuk chapter 3, 17 and 18. Would somebody like to read it really loud? All right, I'll read it. You got it? Excellent. So we look in this passage in verse 17. What is he saying here? What are we missing? We're not really people who live in an agricultural lifestyle. How would we update this passage? Things are going wrong. I'm still going to rejoice in the Lord, the God of my salvation. All right? And he talks about all the sustenance. The fig tree doesn't blossom. No fruit on the vines. Publix is out of food. First world problems, they don't have my chips. They're out of toilet paper, maybe we've experienced that. So we see these things going on, and maybe we make light of it, but he said these are huge things. Each one of these things means we're not eating. Each one of these things means life is going to be very, very difficult. And you compound these all together. And one might have reason to say, well, it's God's fault. And it was going to be God's fault because they were going into these things because of the actions that they had. God was bringing that upon them because they had been going against him. These things are going to be happening. But he says, even if this happens, I will exult in the Lord. I will rejoice in the God of my salvation. And so even then, again, we go to Paul for an example in Philippians chapter 4. Returning to this letter, Philippians 4. Beginning of verse 18. He said, "But I have received everything in full and have an abundance. I am amply supplied, having received from Epaphroditus what you have sent." Am I in the right passage? I may not be in the right one. Philippians 4. Yes, but there's yes, yeah. This is not the passage I was looking for. So I miswrote this passage on here, but we've already seen several examples of Paul in his conviction and what he's done, but it's by the power of God that he is able to do what he's doing. In his mind, he's doing this for God and doing it in a very different, approaching things very differently than we would do that. And so in doing these things, we need to promote some change. If I'm going through these trials I'm going through, things are wrong right now, I need to make some changes. In Luke chapter 5, there's a story of a paralytic man who was wanting to be healed, and his friends helped him in that. In Luke chapter 5, what was the obstacle that they had in trying to approach Jesus? Beginning of verse 17. Couldn't get through the crowd. You've been there? You've been in a crowd maybe, I've been to Disney on, Christmas Day or something like that. It's insane, right? So you're trying to get through a crowd and you can't get through a crowd, especially you're carrying this guy on a mat, on a stretcher. And so they couldn't get through. And so they said, well, we can't get through. Maybe we'll make an appointment for tomorrow, like it's a DMV. So they decided, well, we're just not going to do anything. They hit the first obstacle and they just went home. What did they do? They started tearing the house apart, right? So we can't go in this way, we'll go up and down. Now, this is very much thinking outside the box. How can I get inside the box, right? So they go up on the roof and start taking the tiles off to lower an individual down into this, in front of Jesus, essentially. Now, when they start doing this, in verse 20, whose faith was he talking about? Was Jesus talking about the faith of the one who was on the stretcher in front of him? He said, seeing their faith, right? Seeing their faith. If somebody says, well, you're not miraculously healed today because you didn't have enough faith. Well, according to this passage, it wasn't necessarily about the faith of the individual who was being healed. How much faith does a dead person have? Right? Okay, so in this case, he said, seeing their faith, friend, your sins are forgiven you. Now, obviously, in this situation, Jesus was teaching those who were listening a lesson that he could do both. Jesus, aware of their reasonings, answered and said to them, why are you reasoning in your hearts? Which is easier to say your sins have been forgiven you, or say to get up and walk? And then he obviously gets up and walk, and immediately he got up. And so here in this situation, there were obstacles that this individual had, that these had. There were trials in order to overcome other trials. And he was able to overcome them in this particular certain. So with the change that needed to take place for this individual, they had to find an end around. They had to make sure they were doing the things to make that change happen. I want change to come in my life. I want trials are happening and I need things to change. I might need to make that change. Praying with God and making that change happen. Philippians chapter 2, going back to Philippians, chapter 2, verses 12 through 13. I'm reasonably confident that this is the passage I'm looking for. Can't happen more than once in a lesson. So then, my brother and beloved, just as you have always obeyed, not in my presence only, but much more in my absence, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling, for it is God who is at work within you, both to will and to do for his good pleasure. Now, when we read this passage and we talk about promoting change, whose responsibility is my salvation? My own. My own. Whose responsibility is it that I get through this life and I get through the trials and struggles in this life? Mine. Now, can I do it with God? Yes. I'm not on my own in that. And can I rely, can I maybe go to some other people to help me with it? Yes. But in the end, at the end of the day, it's me. As children, what do we typically do when we encounter trials or something goes wrong? What's our first reaction sometimes? Mom and Dad. We go to Mom and Dad for help. But before that, or maybe well, I'm going to shift the blame, right? And we do that as children. We don't continue that into adulthood, right? We grow out of that and we mature, and we don't continue to pass the blame on other people. We are very mature with our emotions and reasoning skills, and we no longer cast the blame on anybody else. Actually, so maybe that happens. Do I need to make sure that I am in charge of making sure I'm promoting change? Yes. I need to make sure I am promoting change in my life, doing the things that I can do to make those changes happen. Now, am I in control of everything? I'm not saying that. But I am in control of the little things. I'm in control of something. I'm in control of me. So there are changes that need to be made, and I don't know necessarily what you're going through, but you probably know what the next step might be. And us sitting and doing nothing is not going to make anything change. We don't continue on the same path. We continue on the same path. We continue with the same result. And part of that is changing our thinking about things. James chapter 1, verses 2 through 4, he says, "Consider it all joy, brother, when you fall into Disneyland." Consider it all joy when you go to Disney World. Sorry, world, we're on this side of the things. What does he say? Consider it all joy when you go into various trials. James, that is not how you're supposed to be writing this book, right? You're starting off with that. Consider it all joy. Why? Because those things help us grow in our faith. Now, when we're going through those things, we're going through those trials, we're not jumping up and down when we're going through it. I'm so glad I'm going through this trial. Text is not saying that when we're going through it in the moment, that if it hurts, I can't weep. That's not what this text is saying. But there will be a time when I can get to a point where I can see how I was able to glorify God in whatever it was that I went through. Do you see the difference? It's going to be impossible for us to go through some trials and be just grinning ear to ear like a Chester cat. That's not what this text is asking us to do. But at some point, we can consider the joy of having been able to grow in our faith because of these things, looking back on those things. In Acts chapter 5, when there were some disciples that had been beaten because of the message, they were told to stop it. They didn't stop it. They kept preaching, and then they got pulled in front of the principal's office again, the Sanhedrin, and they were told to stop it again, and they beat them this time and then sent them on their way. The text tells us they considered it a joy to have been considered worthy to have suffered for those things. So that's a very, very different way of thinking about something. Now again, in the moment, it's difficult to think about that, but at some point, we need to get to the point where how can I glorify God even in this trial? Even when I'm sitting in prison on the floor, as Paul was chained to another Roman, he was singing joyously. He was not singing, "Nobody knows." Like, he was not singing that song, right? He was singing praises to God because you weren't going to get him down. Even in that trial, he was the triumphant one. Even in that trial. And we can learn to be that way too by changing our thinking. 2 Corinthians chapter 12, again, changing our thinking about what we're going through. Because of the surpassing greatness of the revelations, for this reason, to keep me from exalting myself, there has been given me a thorn in the flesh, a messenger of Satan to torment me, to keep me from exalting myself, is what he's saying about this thorn in his side. Concerning this, I implored the Lord 3 times, please take this away from me. His response was, my grace is sufficient for you, for power is perfected in weakness. Most gladly, therefore, I will rather boast about my weaknesses, so the power of Christ may dwell in me. Therefore, I am well content with weaknesses, with insults, with distresses, with persecutions, with difficulties, for Christ's sake. For when I am weak, then I am strong. Does that take some practice to change our chip and think a different way? Yes. But Paul said, I need to change my thinking about this thorn in my flesh, whatever this thing was. I needed to change the way I thought about it and say, God is being glorified because even in my weakness, Christ is being glorified. The power of Christ is being glorified. So we think about that in changing our concept of what we're going through. Any thoughts or questions? Comments, shout-outs? Again, this is not a situation where by any means you're just going to faith through something, all right? We're dealing with, and I don't know specifics on anything that anybody's going through, but in general, when we're going through trials, conviction and faith in God is going to help us eventually look at the other side of things in a different way. Thank you very much for your time tonight.